Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright. Some very mysterious words that are often associated with dark, mysterious folklore and European history. And I'm sure many people out there who don't quite do a lot of research into film and into the creation of screenwriting, I'm sure a lot of them think that that's where it's from, that it comes out of an old, creepy looking black book made out of human flesh, written in blood, speaking of witchcraft and Satanism and the transformation of men into beasts. But actually, it comes from the mind of a screenwriter who was extremely influential on a lot of filmmakers, and that would, of course, be the mind of Kurt Siodmak. Kurt Siodmak is, of course, the screenwriter of the original 1941 Wolfman film, and a screenwriter who had an enormous impact on my childhood and on my own sensibilities, at least future sensibilities, as a young filmmaker. Now, I never, of course, knew who he was, and I didn't know he was going to be that kind of influence on me. But as I sat down a couple months ago to craft my first film, I began to realize the scale of influence he had on me and the scale of a lot of other influences who were on me. Now, who am I? Well, I'm Bill Wurster, and I'm the director of Werewolf of Carle Place. Now, Werewolf of Carle Place is my first feature-length film. I've done some short stuff before, but Werewolf of Carle Place is kind of the culmination of a dream. The dream of me to put my name on a feature-length film and to be the creator of a feature-length film. Now, Werewolf of Carle Place is not quite 2 hours, but it's almost an hour and a half long. That's 90 minutes. It's official U.S. film feature-length runtime, so it's close enough for me. And it's a full story. It's a horror movie. It's a culmination of a lot of dreams for me personally, and I love it to death. It is a passion project from frame 1 to frame 100, whatever it is, and to have the opportunity to look back on it and, in retrospective, look back at the experience of making it, of the finished product, of the steps that led into actually making it. It's quite a fascinating experience for me personally, and one that I've never quite done before. And I think that the best way to do this is to look back on Werewolf of Carle Place by doing an audio commentary from me, the director. So here's what we're going to do. I do not want to re-render the movie. It took over 24 hours to render, which is insane, and there's a lot of moving parts, and I don't want to re-render the film. So this audio commentary that you're listening to now will be posted individually from the actual film as it is on YouTube. So here's what you're going to do. If you do want to listen to the audio commentary while watching the movie, which I do highly suggest, because that's what I'm going to be doing, you're going to have to open a second tab and play the movie while listening to this commentary, and either put the film on mute or just lower the volume where my voice won't be inaudible. You won't be able to hear the audio from the film on my end. I'm wearing headphones, but if you want to listen to the commentary while watching the movie, you're going to have to listen to them individually, or watch the movie and listen to the audio commentary individually, just because it's not realistic for me to re-render and repost the film just because of time constraints and space constraints. Excuse me, it's a hot one out over here in Carle Place. Unlike it was when we shot it, which I suppose we'll get into when we start watching the film. But that's really the only disclaimer I wanted to throw out to you guys before we actually start watching the movie. So just again, open up a second tab, pull up the movie, it's on my channel. In fact, I'll even put a link to the film in the description here, or something on the actual screen to get to the movie. So once you've got that open, you've got it all buffered up, and you're at 00000, we can get going. So, I'll count to 3, and once I say play, start playing the movie, everybody. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, play. Okay, so here we have the opening shot, now, which is of course a train rushing past the camera. Now there are a lot of things that led up to me coming up with the concept of having a cold opening rather than opening with opening titles or opening production company logos, which I do have them. I just didn't want to use them. I wanted to do a cold open with no music, no text, no nothing, just the situation. I just wanted to open with atmosphere. And since this is supposed to be a horror movie, I thought it would be more than appropriate to open with just atmosphere because, again, it's a horror movie. And I thought that it would be much more tense, set the audience on a much more uneasy path to just open, to just inject them right into the situation without buttering it up or dressing it up. This is just what this movie's going to be doing. And I thought that opening without any logos, any text, any music would be the best way to do that. Although I'll admit, originally I did want to have music for this scene, which turned out to be a big mistake. I did actually have music composed for this film. I didn't end up using any of it because I didn't think that the film where I was going to use that music needed music. The music was great. It was done by a guy named Thomas Duell. And we'll get into Tommy Duell as we get through the rest of the commentary. I talk about where the music was supposed to be. But music for this scene just wouldn't have worked in my opinion. Because the cold, dead air of the environment would have just been killed by the music. And this particular moment that we're watching right here with the growls would have been murdered by music. And also just these frames of what we'll later learn to be the werewolf running past the camera and these growls. I think that they would have been killed by music watching them in retrospect. But when I was on set, I thought, oh, this scene's going to be so much better with music. This is, of course, my cousin Christina Graham playing Lexi Simmons here, the young woman who was murdered, as we'll see right now. So, a lot to cover about this film scene by scene. So, we'll kind of go all over the place. I'll give you certain information about each scene, and I'll leave some certain stuff out that I might say in future vlogs or whatever, because this is too much to cover in too little amount of time. So, the opening scene we shot 3 months ago, and these opening credits you're watching were shot about a month ago. So, of course, we jumped all over the timeline of this film when we were making it. So these first two opening scenes here, the opening murder scene and then the opening credits, are really two big kind of references to a film that was probably the biggest influence on Werewolf of Carle plays, and that will be An American Werewolf in London. The first scene is supposed to be a mix between all the kill scenes that are in An American Werewolf in London. There's that montage of kill scenes in London during the first full moon when David turns into the werewolf for the first time in that spectacular transformation scene, which won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects that year. And the opening scene was supposed to be a mix of those, but directly referencing the scene that takes place in the train station, which also opens with a train rushing past the camera. And I just thought it worked so well. The only changes I wanted to make to it were to actually kind of echo the opening scene of Jaws. To have a young woman who comes back from supposedly the city after a night out, and comes back and has this calm, very safe atmosphere destroyed by our werewolf. And the opening credits are wrapping up here, so last thing I'll say about them, of course, the song Blue Moon was the song used in the opening credits of An American Werewolf in London. And now we have our Godzilla roar alarm, which is actually my ringtone for my actual phone. And I thought that originally it was supposed to be changed to just the normal iPhone alarm sound, and here's my first appearance in the film as William Stone. But I thought that it would just be unnecessary. I was not worrying too much about copyright bullshit with this movie because I wasn't planning on making any money off of it, so I didn't think it was going to be that big of a problem. And we have the first text message from our other protagonist, David Cheney. And the Godzilla roar also kind of was a happy accident because later on in the release of the film, it kind of became a nice reference to my biggest fandom. Since Godzilla, of all the monster properties I was referencing in this film, Godzilla wasn't really one of them. I mean, there's a little bit of talk of radiation later on in the film, and we'll get to that, but overall, Godzilla was not supposed to be one of the properties who was going to be referenced by this film. So that was just kind of a happy accident. Now, the texting was a big problem with this shoot. As you can see here, I just misspelt the word now as Noah or Noe. I completely misspelt that. I didn't notice it when I shot it. I didn't do multiple takes of the texting just because I would have had to erase the full-on text message before that, so I decided to leave it. And the reason why it was so tricky, and you'll see why those takes of the texting are so long and they pop out throughout the rest of the movie, is just because holding a cell phone and texting is really fucking hard. So that's why the spelling error is there. I just was too lazy, or it was just not realistic to do more than one take. Now, this scene seems kind of unnecessary in the grand scheme of the film, but the reason why I put it in there was twofold. One, I wanted to have a frame of William Stone turning off a Bigfoot documentary, which is what was playing on Netflix on the screen there that he just turned off. And I also wanted to give a kind of a natural reason for him to find out about the train station murders. And I thought that the best and most natural way to do that would be William Stone having a conversation with his mother in the morning. And she would be watching the news, having seen something about the murders, and William Stone would have quizzed about it and give his thoughts on it. And this is where we immediately establish his mindset of, A, not being a big fan of the town he lives in, which is, of course, Carle Place, as the title suggests, and also his very analytical mind when it comes to these sorts of animal attacks. This is basically how I would react if something like this was presented to me. But I wanted to present William Stone as a character who really thinks that his opinion is better than everyone else, and I thought that the best way to illustrate that in his first dialogue scene would to be having a conversation with his mother, who is the authority figure in a household, usually, especially in one without a father, as we'll see here. And I thought that the best way to do that would be to have him, hold his opinion so high above hers and of the opinion of the authorities, as we've just known, the cops and the news broadcasters and the respected authority of the masses. And he just considers his opinion so much better than theirs, so much more logical. And he holds this huge thing over everyone else in the film. And I think that it's a very teenager thing to do, being a teenager myself. And also just a very William Stone-ish thing to do, since he's very full of himself, and that ultimately turns out to be one of his downfalls later in the film, and we'll get to that. Now, of course, this series of lines with his mother referencing Will's father and how Will's always late, which is, of course, a negative thing, she says it very jokingly, and Will takes it very seriously. And this was supposed to be the first foreshadow to what is pretty conclusively later in the film, the fact that William Stone's father died. This was not something I wanted to shove down the audience's throat in the film, but I wanted to make it as clear as possible without putting it blatantly in dialogue. So the next shot you're going to see, well, in a couple shots, you're going to see William Stone lifting up his hat he's got there, and what was, again, supposed to be another foreshadow to William Stone's dad, and, of course, the revelation that William Stone's dad died. The hat was supposed to be kind of a reference to how it happened. When he lifts it up here, we'll see it. So here we go. We clearly see the word Stone Racing on the hat, and I was supposed to, what the idea of putting that there was to foreshadow to the audience that William Stone's dad was a race car driver, and more than that, that he died in a racing accident. And I don't know if I did a very good job of seeding all these hints and making it clear that that's what happened, but that was the intention, and I hope that some people out there got it. But it's really not that important to the movie, so that's why it's not blatantly said in dialogue. And now we're going to get, of course, to William Stone's best friends and the other two primary leads in the film. Mike LaGrasso as David Cheney and Nicola O'Rourke as Megan Callahan. Now, there's a long history between how I came up with their characters and the purposes their characters share in the film with Will, because of course William Stone is the main character. This is a William Stone story, much like Casino Royale is a James Bond story, and Raiders of the Lost Ark is Indiana Jones story. But the supporting cast is almost equally essential to the film as the main character is. So William Stone needs a really good supporting cast for the story to work, and I think that Megan Callahan and David Cheney are pretty good to support William Stone's hold as the lead. And David Cheney in particular very much so becomes it's very much so a trio of ensemble characters, but I would say that the two primary leads are, of course, David Cheney and William Stone, as we'll see later in the film. As of right now, though, Will is very much so the protagonist, and these are his supporting cast, though David Cheney has a much more prominent role later, as we'll see. This dialogue scene is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, just because it is such a spitting image of conversations I have with my friends. Now, David Cheney is not really based on Mike, because Mike wasn't my first choice to play David Cheney. David Cheney, in the original outline, was supposed to be played by a friend of mine named Tom Crystal, who hasn't appeared on the channel yet, but I'm going to try and get him on at some point in the summertime, just because he's one of my best friends, and we have a lot of fun together. But I originally wanted Tom to play David Cheney, because that's who David Cheney's based on. He's very much so based on Tom Crystal, and Tom's a great guy, but just as my best, I would say Tom is my best, male friend. And our conversations are very much so there in David and Will's conversations, and in this trio here. Whenever me, Tom, and Nicola have a conversation, this is basically what ensues. So when I heard praise for the film after it had gotten released, of how natural the dialogue was and how it sounded like these three are best friends, that was very much so a mix of how the script was written and my directing of Mike. Now, Mike is, of course, one of my best friends, too. He's a really, really, really great guy. But we don't hang out as much as me and Tom do. So when Tom couldn't do David Cheney, I got a little worried because I'd written a character who was so much like him, and I was like, who am I going to get to play this guy? And then I got Mike, and Mike turned out to be a really great decision and a really great casting call for me because, A, Mike has had acting experience before. He's done, high school plays and stuff, and he's kind of grooming himself to be, a theater and a music major. So he's very much so got that going for him, and he's able to work the drama, which was really key to me because this is, David Cheney is definitely, I would say, the most dramatic role in the film, and probably the most difficult role. Just because William Stone doesn't really have a lot of drama going on until later in the film. In these opening scenes, he's just kind of learning about the situation. And I feel like David, especially later, was a lot harder to play. And for people who don't have, especially acting in a movie before, but who've never really acted before, and Mike has done acting, but never on camera, I'm extremely impressed with how they did it. They really kicked ass in this movie, especially Mike, but Nicola did as well. Nicola has never had any acting experience to think of, and while it was I definitely had to work with her to kind of groom her up to be able to, at the very least, deliver the lines believably. And that's really all the role called for, thankfully. Because she's essentially playing herself, and that was another thing that was done intentionally when writing, was to have these characters be either a spitting image or a believable image of the actor portraying them. While David Cheney was written for Tom, it was a character who was very easily adjustable to someone Mike could play believably, and I think that was a good call when writing, just because for a film with no money behind it, no ability to get people with film acting experience, it was just a good idea, in my opinion, to tell a story that would be realistically played by people who could basically be believably put into the situation. Teenagers who live in Carle Place being played by teenagers who live in Carle Place, and have a very similar friend dynamic to this. So it was just very, very, I think it was a good call, and it definitely helped the film be more believable when it could have been an absolute laughable train wreck, and I'm thankful that it wasn't. This is, of course, Mike's last couple dialogue lines here, and the last couple dialogue lines in this scene. Now, the intention of this scene was very much to establish the cast, to establish myself, Nicola, and Mike, and also to establish the tone of the film as being, while serious, a little bit tongue-in-cheek in the dialogue, that the characters don't take a lot seriously, and that they're very, very sarcastic. And it was a lot to establish character. That was the main point. Now we're going to cut to the response and we have our second kill scene and our final kill scene. Now we have Tom. Tom. I almost forgot for a minute that Tom's in this movie. This is Tom Crystal. This is who was supposed to play David Cheney. He didn't want to be a major character in the film, but I still needed a second person to die, so I casted him as Alex Treacher, the second man to be murdered by the werewolf. And this is also one of my favorite scenes in the movie, just because of how... This is probably my favorite scene, at least horror-wise, just because I think it's the scariest, and I think that... Tom played a drunk person really realistically, and also it looks great, I think. I think the lighting is amazing in this scene, and it's all natural street lights and stuff. I didn't have a lot of lighting on this film, especially in the exterior scenes. There's nothing there. It was a little bit here and there in the interior stuff, but nothing in the exterior scenes. I mean, there were one or two shots where it was totally pitch black, where we had to pull out our phones and use them as flashlights to illuminate the screen a little bit. But aside from that, nothing. And we have our first visual appearance of a piece of the werewolf now. Tom's character walks across the frame, and we have a bit of the werewolf popping off as well. And that's my hand playing the werewolf. Mike was not here, and he didn't have to be here because I just decided to get in front of the camera and put my hand in the werewolf glove and just act out the werewolf. And this is something I didn't touch on in the opening scene with the werewolf POV shots. This was a mix of me and Mark's. Mark Temporal was the guy who shot the movie and edited part of it. This is a mix between my cinematography and his. Now, to bounce back to the kill scene for a second, we had to redo that last line a couple times just so it wouldn't be comical, and it didn't quite work out. Because originally the intention was and Sid Part 2's first appearance in the film, and only appearance, this is his cameo. Originally, I wanted the scene to end without a kill. I just wanted it to end and then jump right to the response to the kill, because the kill is not important. The kill is just there for the audience, and I think it's a cool visual. The kill is there to illuminate a response, and I didn't think showing blood or showing the werewolf ripping the guy apart was important. So we just decided to jump right to the news broadcast and to jump into the reaction of Carle Place and of William Stone. Now, this little newsreel we just went through here, those little things at the bottom of the screen, all inside jokes between me and Ian. They're supposed to be funny only if you know me and Ian personally. We filled them with inside jokes. Like David Tennant under murder charges, that's an inside joke when we were making jokes about Doctor Who. But otherwise, no one else is really supposed to get them. The second texting scene in the film, a little better, no typos, but major grammatical error. I forgot to put in the word you. I don't know why. It might have just been an on-the-call spot, because it's not really necessary. You get the gist of what Will's trying to communicate with, hey man, you up. That was the written line. I forgot to put you, or I just cut it out. I don't really remember. But again, it is really hard to text while holding a camera. Don't try it at home, kids. Now, this particular scene was kind of unusual to put in kind of in retrospect, because in retrospect, it doesn't really serve a lot of purpose, seemingly. At least until you get to the next scene. Because seemingly it's just William Stone, just kind of chilling out at night. And just kind of having his initial gut reactions to the werewolf. It doesn't become important to the film until right about now. William Stone encounters the werewolf indirectly. He's just seen news reports about the second murder, and he's just heard a really loud and ominous howl in the distance that doesn't match any creature in the neighborhood. If you're William Stone, if you know monster lore and you know the animals in the area, you hear a howl, you know there's a murder, and then of course you see nothing but a big, bright, full moon arcing over Carle Place, some very particular thoughts are going to run through your mind. And we, of course, get into those thoughts in the next scene. This scene was, of course, to cement what William Stone thinks the killer is. And tomorrow, and in the next scene, is when he speaks it out for the audience and for the rest of the cast. And he explains what exactly he thinks is going on and why he thinks it's possible. Which, of course, David Cheney will refute, but even still, his conclusion seems somewhat logical. Now, I didn't quite know how to end this scene, so I just decided to throw in one last shot of the full moon, which would transition into the next dialogue scene. Because originally it was just supposed to be a cut, but I was like, that's really awkward, so let's throw in one ending shot and one establishing shot. So I got some stock footage of the surrounding area and put that in there. This scene made me lose sleep at night. Now, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, but it made me lose sleep. Oh God. So, you're listening to some of the worst audio ever put in a movie. And I lost sleep over it because it was terrible. Now, the audio is not unintelligible, but it is fairly bad. And here's why. We shot all the exterior shots in terrible places. Carle Place is a terrible place to shoot a movie, so don't ever try it, kids, because oh my God, is it crowded. For a small-ass town, for a town that's barely a 1 square mile, it is packed to the brim with motherfuckers. And when you shoot near a major road, like this is Cherry Lane, and for those of you who don't live in Carle Place, you won't know what that is, but that's the major road in Carle Place. You don't shoot a scene for a movie next to it. But I wanted this visual. I wanted William Stone and David Cheney to be sitting in a public place, and this was the only way I could do it, so the audio was kind of an after product of that. What made it worse was the fact that it was a windy day. Because the car stuff, the cars were not a big problem in the first scene. The big problem came in with wind. It fucked with the microphone. Some of the audio got lost, and some of the lines are very difficult to hear just because of the wind. It just buried the fucking audio. And there were about 3 or 4 different things I tried to do to fix it. I used the most audible takes as opposed to the best takes, since I figured it's more important for the audience to get the ideas of the scene, because this is the major scene where William Stone decides that it's a werewolf, and we know it's a werewolf in this case because we've seen it, and now William Stone is kind of confirming it for us. So it was just very, very important to get across the ideas, so I decided to go for the most audible takes as opposed to the best takes. So first I did that, then I sent all the audio over to Sid Part 2 to go in with Audacity and try to lower the wind noise, and it saved a couple of takes, and it saved quite a bit of the scene, but some of the lines were just so bad and so windy that it just didn't help. Like a couple of these lines you're hearing right now they just could not be saved by Audacity. And Ian tried his best. It's just I was just stupid that day and just didn't either decide to go for a different day or go for a different location, because this was just not a smart move. And then, of course, for the final film, for certain lines that were integral to the story, I had to go in and dub them, and the dub work is not great. It's pretty bad, in fact. All the lines we redubbed, it's very easily noticeable that they were dubbed. The mouth movements don't match up. The voice levels sound different. The mouth movements, I tried my best to match them up, but, just different speeds of takes, and I just couldn't, going in and trying again and again to match up the mouth movements it just didn't work out. And then the level problems were not terrible. I got basically a stock run of background noise and put that behind the voice, and it worked out fairly well. They sound like they're outside. The biggest problem was the mouth movements not matching up, which is why there's not a lot of dub work in this scene. I originally intended there to be a lot more. There's 2 or 3 lines in here that are still unintelligible, or fairly unintelligible, and that's just because I didn't want to dub them. I only dubbed the lines that were completely unintelligible because I knew I couldn't do good dub work, and again, I thought that I tried to get the best out of an otherwise unsalvageable scene. And while it's probably the worst scene in the movie, at least, again, cinematography-wise, it's one of my favorite dialogue scenes. But in terms of, the way it was shot and the execution of it, it's one of the worst scenes in the movie. and I really feel bad for it. I lost sleep over this scene, and I'm glad that it didn't cause as much of a problem as I thought. I thought this was going to break the movie, and it didn't. I got a lot of positive reaction. A lot of people said that it wasn't as bad as I was making it out to be, so I was very, very happy. And just everything turned out for the best. I'm glad. Now, of course, if I had my way, I'd go back and reshoot this, but it's unnecessary, I think, at this point. The movie is out. It's done. This is how it's presented, and people seem to like it, so maybe one day when I remake the whole movie, I'll reshoot this scene, which I would like to do one day, because there's other stuff in here that I would like to fix. So that's the sum up of the audio problems. Let me tell you a quick story before the scene wraps up. When we shot this scene, it was Labor Day, and the cops, or Memorial Day, excuse me, and the cops were at peak looking out for alcoholic driver, or for drunk drivers. Excuse me, that was weird. Fireworks, anything that could potentially be illegal that they'd have to put a stop to. And when you've got two teenagers with a camera yelling at the top of their lungs and talking about murder and about werewolves and about drugs, there's a mention of drugs in these lines, then it's fairly believable as to why they would be called on us. They got an anonymous tip that there was some suspicious activity going on, and we're in the middle of a take. Two cop cars pulled up on either side of our set and told us to stop the recording and asked us a bunch of questions, asked to see our IDs, asked us if we had any stuff on us, to which I replied, no. And then they said that we couldn't be there for more than an hour and that otherwise we'd have to leave. I told them that we weren't planning on being there much longer, and they left us alone. Very, very scary situation. I thought they were going to kick us out, but that's illegal because it's public property. So it turned out for the best, I guess, but fairly funny that the cops got called on us in the middle of a take, and we were freaking out. Me and Mike looked at each other like, because here's the thing, when they pull up, I was like, there's no way they're for us. I was like, when they pull up, they're going to pull a driver over, I know it. And then the guy started getting in, I'm like, they're going to go check something. And then the guy started walking towards me, and I was like, fuck. And that's the moment where we looked at each other and just kind of got up and walked over to the cops and saw what was up. So now we're cutting to one of the most important scenes in the movie. William Stone goes to look for the werewolf. Now I should mention here that there is about a 10-minute dialogue scene cut out between this scene and the previous scene with David and Will talking about whether or not it's a werewolf. Meg was supposed to make a major appearance in the film in a previous dialogue scene. We just didn't get the chance to shoot it, and I thought it was unnecessary. There were a lot of lines in there I liked, a lot of little bit of character stuff for William Stone, but it wasn't really necessary, and the only way we would have had the chance to shoot it is if we would have postponed wrapping up principal photography. And I just looked at it, I kind of calculated how long it was going to take to shoot, how long it was going to take to edit it, and getting the movie done on time. There was a massive due date for this film, and I just said to myself, it's not worth it. So I cut it. And it was kind of a, watching it for me is a little awkward because I know there's a big chunk missing, but people seem to understand the story well enough. The story is definitely intelligible without that one scene, and it's not like there's a plot hole, but it was basically just spelling out more clearly what Will was doing here, what his plan was, and what you're about to see, and basically saying to Meg that he thinks it's a werewolf. But there was one major line that got cut out for Will's character that I still wish was in the film, and that was just a line about how Dave is sick of Will holding his opinions over other people, which is going to become a major part of their characters later in the film. Now, it still makes sense with that previous scene with his mother, and of course, William Stone, that bleeds in with every dialogue scene when he's talking to somebody, the way he holds his opinion over people. But it would have been nice to have that become an argument early in the film, and then it gets brought up later on when we start to learn more about the werewolf. But now we're cutting into the toughest scene in the movie to shoot. This is, by the way, I think this is the best moon in the film, special effects wise. So this was the toughest scene to shoot. While the previous scene had bad audio, this one took us about a month to shoot because there are 3 different locations. We shot it on about 5 different days, and there's just a lot of moving parts. You've got a phone conversation. You've got William Stone walking around at night looking for the werewolf. You've got intercutting between Megan and Will, and it's all at night, so we had to worry about lighting. So for the majority of this shoot, it was Mark shooting, and whenever he would set up, I told him, make sure I'm behind a street lamp, so that way the light is illuminating our set. So that way the light is going to bleed over Will's face, because it's more important to see his front than it is to see the background. The background should look dark because it's a horror movie, and we're supposed to get the impression that William Stone is being consumed by this, he's being oppressed by this darkness, that the werewolf could pop out at any time. And it worked out pretty well. The set is very well illuminated, especially for a film with no lighting. I mean, you can see William Stone's face clearly. What he's doing is very clear. And everything that was supposed to be clear to the audience, I think, is very clear. So we had to be very careful about where we shot. We always had to be behind a street lamp. And thankfully, the progression of William Stone walking in this neighborhood fit where the street lamps were placed. And when it didn't, we adjusted it so it did fit it. So it worked out very well. This is, again, one of my favorite dialogue scenes. We get a great debate between Will and Meg on what Will's doing. Again, we also get a lot of character stuff for William Stone in this scene. And the major one is, of course, that he doesn't give a fuck about his own life. That all he cares about is knowing that he's right and that he found a werewolf in his hometown, and he doesn't care what else is going to happen to him, because that's the kind of the goal of his life at this point is, oh my god, there's a cryptid in my hometown. I've got to investigate this no matter what the cost. And his friends and family are very worried about him, and it's kind of the thing that makes him a very irrational character. It makes him kind of crazy. And that's another thing that's kind of based on me with his characters. I'm a little irrational, a little crazy when it comes to stuff like this. If I want something, I'll do anything I can to see that goal acquired and even ignore other responsibilities in life to see it acquired, like making this movie, for instance. A lot of life commitments were dishonored making this movie. But hopefully my friends and family will forgive me for that, since now the movie's done, and hopefully they enjoyed it. To say, oh, wow, yeah, this was kind of worth him not going to work this day, or him being unable to go to this family event. And now we get Will's second indirect encounter with the werewolf with this howl. I absolutely love this transition from dialogue right into the action scene. It's not much of an action scene, it's more of a chase scene. And it's this was supposed to be kind of a horror trope put on its head. In all horror films, when there's a monster in it, a murderer, you've got the human cast running away from the monster. In this scene, I wanted it to be the human chasing the monster, since it just made sense to me. Now, the music, of course, you're hearing is the Doctor Who I Am the Doctor theme from seasons 5, 6, and 7. And the reason for that was just because I thought that it fit the tone. Whenever I was shooting this scene and when I was writing it, I had the music playing in my head, so I just decided to go for it, and thankfully the video didn't get flagged for it. So it was very, very thankful. But I wanted to cut out at the moment where Will's not sure where the werewolf is. But once he knows, he starts running, and then we cut to a different familiar score, and that's, of course, the Wolfman theme. And now, ladies and gentlemen, William Stone comes face to face with the werewolf, and we have our big, huge, epic shot with the roars and the music building, and we get our werewolf face, and this looks surprisingly good in darkness and on camera. Of course, the mouth doesn't move, but that was impossible for us to do. And I think that the face looks fairly scary for a no-budget film, and especially with the fact that the werewolf looked pretty crappy when you were looking at it in person. So the darkness and the fact that it's not on camera for very long, and the fact that there's a lot of quick cuts with it, I think was a big help to making it look at least somewhat realistic. And I think it looks fairly good. There's a couple moments here or there where you can see Mike's skin underneath the werewolf, which was a problem. And there were a couple shots we had to cut out where the werewolf would have been doing something that we just couldn't pull off with a guy in a costume. And this is one of them. This is, of course, the scene where William Stone realizes that David Cheney is the werewolf. Which is, of course, kind of supposed to be a reveal, though really not. We're about halfway through the film, and we already know who the werewolf is, which is kind of unheard of for a monster movie. Usually when you find out who the werewolf is, it's about the last 20 minutes of the movie, and we're about to kill the werewolf. So, wanted to take a little bit of a different tack with this film. So I didn't want to make it a big reveal as to who the werewolf was, because it's not really important. The werewolf, the mystery of who the werewolf is not as important as what the werewolf is. So I wanted to seed it early on, so that way the audience wouldn't be worrying about it and would be more concerned with William Stone, his character, and the other stuff going on in the movie. So there's a lot of lines of dialogue in those opening 2 dialogue scenes from David that kind of almost blatantly says, "I'm the werewolf." Here we have Mike's house. Now there's a shot cut out of here which would have just blatantly outright shown us that Dave was the werewolf, where Will bursts into his house and we have David convulsing on the floor. But I didn't think it was necessary, and it would have required us to go into Mike's house at 1 o'clock in the morning, and his parents just weren't having that. So it wasn't necessary, and we ended up doing it anyway. And now we have another one of my favorite scenes, and one of the most, some of the best dialogue in the film, and some of the most interesting ideas to me. One thing I wanted to kind of do was to have it be very, very awkward as to William Stone and David Cheney sitting down after learning that Dave was the werewolf and not being sure how to react. That's why this scene is very... the opening dialogue lines are very awkward. Just because I wanted it to be like they have no idea what to say to each other. Because the big thing that's different in this film as opposed to other werewolf movies is that David doesn't know he's a werewolf until Will tells him. As we learn later on, the transformation would happen, and a reaction by his brain would not allow him to remember it because of the trauma of it. And the actual physical trauma was just represented when we heard David in the bathroom vomiting. It's a big shock to learn that you're turning into a werewolf, and his brain subconsciously reacted to that by not allowing him to remember it. It's almost like a self-defense system of the body. And the idea is that all werewolves do that in their early stages of transformation until they can be told by another human, or their bodies become ready to be able to accept it. A werewolf almost has to break in their human body in order to allow it to work fully. Otherwise, the human will either suffer major mental trauma or probably die. So that's kind of the idea we were playing around with in these couple scenes. And what also makes the werewolf so scary, as opposed to what it can do to other people, but also what it can do to the person who's turning into the werewolf. And that was something I also wanted to explore that hasn't been done a lot in werewolf films. And that was the purpose of these scenes. Now you'll notice that this is the only scene in the film that was noticeably color corrected, and the reason for that was because the lighting in Mike's house is terrible. We shot this on overcast day. It was all gray outside, which kind of fit the film in the way of it's a very dark scene where Mike finds out he's the werewolf, and it's kind of awkward. But it hurt the faces. There's a lot of emotional reactions in this scene, and it kind of hurt the faces to not be able to see them. Mike's was fairly good. You could see Mike's face just fine. Mine was the problem. And while this is mainly Mike's scene, William Stone's reactions are still very important. So I had to fix them as best as I could. So I amped up the brightness and I amped up the saturation. And it looks okay. It still doesn't look perfect, of course, but I think that it helped out a lot. You can see Will's face now. The sun was a big problem because of what you could see of the sun from the overcast was blacking out Will's face. And again, I tried to face it to the best of my ability. It doesn't quite work, but it looks good enough for what I was trying to go for. This scene was fairly easy to shoot. It's just, a two-cut system of cutting in between mine and Mike's reactions. It was fairly easy to shoot. Except for the dialogue. A couple lines ago, we heard Mike kind of going all Quint from Jaws on us and describing the event in his life where he was attacked by the werewolf, and that was kind of the scene from Jaws where Quint talks about the Indianapolis was a big inspiration on that scene. And the thing was that it's a very, very long speech that Mike's giving, especially in terms of someone who's never acted on film before. And he didn't have the script in advance of shooting, so he had to memorize it on the spot. So what we decided to do was do 3 takes of it. do it once, just straight the speech, all audio, so he could look at the script, and then cut the speech in half and do one take of the first half and then one take of the second half, and split it up by a shot of Will's reaction. So that way we could cut. It could look like one continuous shot then. And it worked out fairly well. It's fairly continuous. The audio levels match up because we didn't move the camera, so I was very, very happy. Now, the biggest criticism lobbed at the film plot-wise is that probably the biggest plot hole in the film is where the fuck is Dave's parents. You see Will's mother early on in the film, but I didn't want to have to ask Mike's parents to be in the movie. It just wasn't a realistic thing. And also, I don't think it was necessary. I wanted to present it as William Stone is the one dealing with the werewolf. And I wanted to write out the parents by having Mike say, A, if I tell them I'm a werewolf, they're going to think I'm crazy or I'm doing drugs. And if they do believe me, I'm either going to get locked up or killed because they're going to figure out I'm the one who killed those people. So William Stone is really the only person he can tell realistically and the only person who can really help him out. So I tried to write out the parents as best as I could, and I think that I at least in my opinion, I think I succeeded because it's almost like Dave is caught in a dead end of if I tell my parents, they're going to think I'm crazy, and if I tell a doctor, he's going to think I'm crazy, or if he believes me, I'm going to get locked up. So William Stone is my best bet for getting help and also from preventing other people from dying. So that was the purpose of Dave going to Will for solving the werewolf problem. And another one of my favorite cuts, cutting from Dave's house to Will's house, and specifically Will's attic, when Will is about to describe to him what he wants to do with the werewolf. I thought it was good for comedic effect, but it was also kind of an interesting cut. So that's why I did it. So this is another one of my favorite scenes, because this is just all-out exposition of what the werewolf is, or at least what Will's theory as to what it is. And just some of mine and Mike's best acting in the film, in my opinion, because we were really on target with what we were trying to do with this scene. We were both on the same page, and we both really liked the dialogue that was being read, and that goes a long way to letting the scene speak naturally. So this scene was shot over the course of about 2 days. We had to do 2 different filming sessions for Mike's section and then the section with the werewolf. But this dialogue stuff was shot in 1 day, and it was very, very easy. The script was not very difficult to memorize except for Will's exposition, because it's filled to the brim with pseudoscientific lingo and just crazy, ideas. I borrowed a lot of the pseudoscience in this scene from Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which was a film I didn't know I was going to draw so much from because it's not so much about the Wolfman. It's a lot more about Frankenstein's monster, but there's a lot of stuff about the werewolf transformation, about what the full moon can do, that I thought was very, very interesting. One of which was a big inspiration on how the werewolf transformation in this film works, is that the full moon, if you directly expose the werewolf to it, the stronger it gets. If you kill a werewolf using a silver bullet, it's dead unless you expose it to the full moon, in which you can bring it back to life. So it's essentially immortal. There's no way to kill it unless you kill it and then lock it up in a concrete, morgue, and then don't expose it to the full moon, so that way it won't be born again. But of course, the characters in the film aren't smart enough to believe that. So that's what this scene is based on. The full moon is the cause of the transformation, but it's the full moon itself. As long as the rays of the full moon are touching the werewolf in some way, the transformation can happen. The problem comes in as to how strong the ensuing werewolf is going to be. So I thought that it'd be stupid to say that the werewolf can rip through human flesh and break human bone and jump and scratch around and just claw through human flesh, but it can't break through a crappy wooden door that was bought at Lowe's. So I said, alright, I'll write in that the werewolf is weaker when it's not fully exposed to the full moon. And we, of course, got into that whole radiation thing. Now, the radiation is a lot more about the direct light of the moon as opposed to, the invisible kinds of radiation that comes out of a reactor. It's a lot more like the direct light that hits the person's body. So, the radiation is still going to seep through a wooden roof, let's say, but it's not going to get through as strong, since you're not looking directly at the full moon. So the ensuing werewolf is going to be weaker. That was kind of my logic. It, of course, makes no sense. It makes sense. It's, of course, impossible scientifically, but so is a werewolf, so I said, fuck it, I'll write it in. And I think it's a pretty fucking cool idea, in the same vein as some of the ideas in, say, Troll Hunter. Troll Hunter was another big inspiration on writing this film, in terms of its pseudoscience. There's another bit cut out here, just that a specific scene of Will shoving sleeping pills down Dave's throat. That's why Dave is out of breath in this scene. But I decided to cut it out, A, because I forgot to shoot one shot that was essential, and B, it wasn't really important. And of course, later dialogue, makes it clear that he took sleeping pills as well. The purpose of the sleeping pills was mainly to show that, make Dave drowsy, so that way the werewolf wouldn't be as vicious in the next scene when he transforms, but it's not really necessary. The werewolf is still fairly vicious, and again, it's spoken in dialogue there, so that's why I cut it. And now we get to one of my favorite scenes, and where I think this is my best directed scene, and also my best written. For someone who didn't want to put the werewolf on screen very much, I thought that it would be really, really smart to contrive a scene where I can have an awesome werewolf scene with awesome dialogue and awesome reactions, and some cool visuals, but without actually showing the werewolf. And I decided the way to do that would to be, let's lock it up in an attic and then have Will react to it. So then we have this great bit, in my opinion, of the werewolf banging and howling, and we get like a walkthrough of a werewolf transformation. We have Will being our guide, and Dave being our exploration of Will exploring the moments building up to the transformation, and then we have our ensuing transformation. Again, some great acting from Mike here. I think that this is a really effective werewolf transformation without actually showing it. I just told him, act like you're sick, act like you're feeling sick, and act like you're actually being doused with heavy heat, which Mike was. This was filmed during the summer, and his suffering from the heat was not exactly fake. He was in a hot attic. That attic is legendarily hot amongst my friends. If you go in there, it is like walking into an oven. So these cries of anguish, and Dave, screaming and looking sweaty and breathing heavy. That was all not so much acting as it was acting, but it was also Mike reacting seriously to the heat that was in that attic. And of course, we're both wearing jackets in like 85-degree weather, so the overheating was not exactly acting. Although it helped the performance a lot. And now we have William Stone encountering the werewolf up close and personal for the second time. Of course, it's no danger to him because it's banging on an attic door that it can't get through because it's packed full of sleeping pills and not as strong as it was when Will encountered it the previous night. This is, again, one of my favorite scenes. Almost everything I wanted to happen happened, which was important and big for me as someone who just directed their first movie. So I was very, very thankful that it all went basically according to plan. Nothing really happened that ruined what I wanted to do. Now, the one behind the attic right now, or behind the door, actually doing the banging is not actually Mike. It's my cinematographer, Mark Temporal, meaning there's no one behind the camera right now. It was me operating it and cutting out the bits, of course. And it's actually Mark behind the attic door banging and howling, subbing in for Mike. And everyone who basically, played the werewolf in some sense got a credit in the ending credits. For example, in the opening shot, it was in the opening scene where you have that shadow that rushes past the camera. That was a guy I know named Jeff who put his hood up and ran past the camera. And then, of course, that hand you saw, that was me. All the stuff in the werewolf costume, that was Mike. But then behind the attic door was Mark. This was actually the last scene we shot, the scene we're about to watch, or at least it was filmed on the last day of shooting. Just because it was simple. I wanted to get all the tough stuff out of the way. It's just Mike and Dave, Will and Dave having a conversation about the previous night's events. And it's, again, one of my favorite scenes in the film, just because now we get concrete, evidence of what this werewolf is capable of and how it affects the human body. We're fresh off a transformation. Will has seen everything that the werewolf can do now, so now he's building his theories, doing his research, working on what exactly the werewolf is, and perhaps working on a way to beat it, which we get part of that in this scene as well. This scene, in terms of shooting, was, again, very simple. The only problem that became prevalent when we shot it was the washing machine. My grandmother refused to turn off the washing machine when we shot this, which is not her fault. I didn't alert her beforehand we were going to be shooting this. But she refused to turn off the washing machine when we shot this, so I had to deal with it. And the audio wasn't ruined as much as I was worried it was going to be. It's fairly unaffected. It's just kind of a booming in the background. If anything, it kind of gives the audio sense of realism, but it's kind of annoying, especially when you're watching it with headphones on, because then you can really hear it. And thankfully, it wasn't too much of a problem. The whole concept of the eyes was very, very strange. When I'm sitting down writing a script, weird things pop into my head, and a lot of weird things popped into my head when writing Werewolf of Carle Place, especially when I was running wild with what the werewolf is and how the transformation works. The concept of the eyes being a visual representation of the werewolf was something that's fairly, kind of inconsequential, because the whole purpose of it in the finished film is that once Dave can see through them, the werewolf and him are kind of one, and that's when he starts to become kind of the villain of the film. But that can just be a simple thing that you don't even have to show, because that's in a lot of werewolf properties, and that's what werewolves do. It makes the person who is the werewolf more aggressive. It's not really. It wasn't something I had to make a big deal out of, but I decided to because it was kind of a creepy idea. And again, something I could achieve without visual effects, I could just achieve through writing and directing. And something I think we did very well was just Dave reacting to seeing these eyes. And this big confrontation he has with the eyes, which is fairly intense, and again, without any visual effects. It's just done with William Stone's dialogue and Mike's acting, which is fantastic in this scene, by the way. You can tell that this was after he'd been on screen a lot and dealt a lot with my directing. He knew what I wanted, he knew how to do it, and he kicked ass in the scene. He kills this role, again, especially in this scene. So I'm very, very thankful for it. It just really worked out well. The eyes thing, when I look back on the script, it was something I really, really considered cutting out. Just because, again, as I described earlier, it's not all that necessary to what it's trying to do. It's not essential to expressing that the werewolf is taking over Mike's mind. It's expressed a lot in the ensuing dialogue scene after the third werewolf transformation. So, it wasn't an essential aspect, and it would have drawn out the shoot, but I decided, fuck it, it's not going to hurt us to shoot it anyway. I like the dialogue, so we're just going to leave it in. So we decided to leave it in. And I was really happy, because it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and it worked out very, very well. And we got to have this great shot of Dave attacking William Stone as kind of the werewolf in his human body for once, which is funny. He almost transforms into the werewolf without transforming into the werewolf for a minute here by attacking Will and wanting to kill him. This scene was kind of funny to shoot because me and Mike both had to prep ourselves for getting into a fake fight without, laughing or actually hurting each other. Mike was a little bit timid about kind of lunging at me and grabbing me. I told him it was okay. If he hurt me, I didn't really care. I wanted the visuals of it. I didn't care what happened to me. So he fucking went for it. And he knocked me into that wall, but I didn't care. It didn't hurt that much, and it was... I can take some pain from my art. I was very, very happy with how it turned out. And I also love this line, because here's the thing. The "can you see me" thing sounds a little corny, so I had to counteract it with some kind of brief moment of sarcasm in Werewolf of Carle Place. So I wanted to have a line where Dave reacts to that kind of corny line with a really sarcastic line where he says, "You're not invisible, jerk." So I really, really like that. And I threw it in there for balance. I thought that was important to making the film not seem corny. Because that series line is a little corny because it's taking itself very seriously. So I needed some sarcasm to counteract that seriousness. It's kind of comic relief in that sense. And again, one of my something that was kind of a reference to previous werewolf films with the werewolf the character who becomes the werewolf getting physical enhancements from the werewolf. This goes back to the Wolfman. It's also kind of a reference to the David Cronenberg version of The Fly, where Jeff Goldblum is able to do great physical things once he becomes the Fly, like break through walls and stuff, and stick to surfaces and use fly powers. So it's kind of a reference to that. What it's also a reference to is, again, An American Werewolf in London with this montage here. The song is actually from a sex scene in An American Werewolf in London, which is kind of awkward. But it works here as kind of a comedic song, or at least a light song, to play in a fairly comedic scene where we just kind of have a montage of the rest of the week of William Stone interacting with the werewolf and having the werewolf locked up, and I thought we could get in some great jokes here. This bit is especially funny with William Stone yelling at the werewolf for not being quiet while he's trying to read, and then also William Stone's watching the Wolfman, and with the werewolf locked up in his attic, and he asks the werewolf for his opinion on a film about a werewolf, and the reaction seems to be negative, so Will makes jokes about that. This is one of my favorite scenes. It's hilarious. The song choice was, I think, very, very good. And we have this great little fade out from the Wolfman. The only awkward thing is that there's music from the Wolfman in the film, so it's like, is the Wolfman in continuity with Werewolf of Carle plays? Is the fictional music being used in a movie where the Wolfman is a fictional character? What also is a little weird is, of course, the name David Cheney is a big, huge reference to Lon Chaney Jr., the actor who played the Wolfman. So is he related to Lon Chaney? Is he related to the original Lon Chaney? Who knows? Who cares? It's just a reference, so don't think too much about it, kids. So that was just supposed to be one quick little reference there. Again, one of my favorite scenes here where Will becomes the much more pessimistic of the two here. This is where William Stone and David Cheney have their big, huge fallout, where David Cheney kind of becomes the villain of the film, and William Stone firmly plants himself as the hero, with William Stone wanting to fully separate the werewolf and David Cheney, but David Cheney starts to like the werewolf and likes how it makes him feel. So this is where their fallout happens, where William Stone can no longer stay on the same page as Dave. This was shot on the same day as the previous dialogue scene, and originally I was going to have William Stone and David Cheney change outfits, but I decided, there's enough days that separate the two that it makes sense that they could either be wearing the same clothes, or even you could have the mental explanation of, oh, they wear the same clothes when they deal with the werewolves, that way they don't ruin clothes or whatever. Who knows? Doesn't really matter. It's a very small thing, and no one seems to notice it, so why the fuck I just pointed it out, who knows? So this scene was very, very fun to write just because I love character confrontation. What I was taking a lot of inspiration from was whenever the Doctor talks to the Master in Doctor Who. That was kind of what this was hearkening back to. I think that it works fairly well. And that awesome writing in the Russell T Davies run on Doctor Who with the Master in it kind of seeps into this scene, I feel, when William Stone is yelling at David Cheney. Now, this is where the scene with Megan earlier in the film that got cut out, where she was in on the whole werewolf plan, because in the film, Will never outright says his werewolf theory to Meg. This is it would have been helpful to have a line where David makes his initial feelings on Will holding his holding his opinions above other people a little bit more impactful, because there's this huge argument where David thinks that Will's jealous over the werewolf because the werewolf makes David feel powerful, and he thinks that that Will is feeling jealous over the fact that David is more powerful than he is. And that was supposed to be the core of their falling out, was David likes the way the werewolf makes him feel and not the way Will does, and Will All Will wants is for his friend to be okay and for the people outside to be okay. So no one dies. His friend doesn't have to die. He thinks that he's got a control over the situation. He really doesn't. The level of gravity the werewolf has over the situation is just impossible to control by both William Stone and David Cheney. And that, I think, deals with the fact of them just being teenagers. They're not superheroes or scientists or military men. They're just teenagers dealing with a very dark and powerful situation. And I thought that it would make sense that the situation would fall out of their control. That David would lose his control over the werewolves, would almost lose his humanity in a way. And that Will would lose his control over David and his control over the werewolf. And in terms of a plot standpoint, it's also there to get us from A to Z of getting a fight scene between Will and the werewolf, even though Will knows the werewolf is his friend. Because at this point, this is where all bets are off. In this scene, Will doesn't care. Or, well, he does care, but this is the scene where William Stone decides, I have to stop this, and no matter what happens, I have to do it with whatever things I have to use to do it. So, you know, this was the scene where that's spelled out. And it was again, a lot of fun to write. Just a very nice scene. I think that it works very well. Mike completely kills it. Again, in this scene, he owns the character of David Cheney. There was supposed to be a couple scenes in between this and the original outline where we would get some other dialogue scenes between Will and Dave in between the first transformation and the final transformation, but ultimately turned out to be unnecessary. Would have added filming time that was just unnecessary. Now, the thing about this scene was when we shot it, this is the last scene we shot, and officially, not just on the last day, this was the last scene we shot in all. And the problem was that we were both dead tired when we shot this, because we shot this the day after we shot the last action scene, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. So we were both dead tired because we were up until about 1:30 in the morning shooting that scene. And Mike had worked the night before. It was just, we were both dead tired. So it was just one hell of a scene to shoot and one hell of a shoot to get done with. So we were both very relieved that the scene was done after that huge night of running around and putting Mike in the costume. We were just both relieved. And this is one of the saddest scenes in the film because this is the scene where two best friends just both lose it and can't be best friends anymore. It's just very, very sad. Last scene of the movie we shot, and now we fade, ladies and gentlemen, into the last part of the movie, 1 month later. Now, people ask me why I did the whole 1 month later thing. Was it kind of unnecessary to have that huge gap in time? No, it was absolutely necessary, because the sequence of events wouldn't make sense with a full moon cycle. You can't have 8 days straight of a full moon. We barely got away logically with having 7. So I had to have a series of time pass between the first week of werewolf transformations to the second. So we had to jump a month from David's first cycle of transformations to his second. I also thought that it would work well to make the wound that was festering between Will and David worse, that their inability to be friends anymore and David living with the werewolf would have gotten worse to the point of where we're going to see in a few minutes. Some stuff got cut out here as well. There was supposed to be a dialogue scene between David and Meg where we would have David's last dialogue scene in the film. Again, kind of unnecessary. Meg describes what happens in that scene very well in this dialogue scene. We also would have gotten the chance to see Meg's sister, who's talked about in this scene, who is apparently dating David, but that's very clear, I think, in the dialogue, and it was kind of unnecessary to shoot. And again, we didn't have time to shoot it because Nicola's house was being worked on while the shooting was going on, so we couldn't shoot in her house. So we decided to instead just work with what we had and just describe as much as we could the relationship between David and Meg's sister Liz without the actually seeing that scene. So we have it described here by Meg. And this scene was kind of a pain in the ass to shoot because Nicola hadn't been in the movie for a while we were shooting it, so I had to kind of reteach her how to memorize a line and how to deliver it, so Kind of a hard directing job for me in this scene, but this is our last phone conversation in the film. So it was a little bit difficult, just because Nicola is not used to acting, so it's no fault of her own that she had a little bit of a hard time memorizing the lines and delivering them. It was just because she's not an actress. So it was a little hard for me. Now, this is the explanation we have for Will's mom not being there when the final action scene happens. This scene was supposed to be very, very different in the original screenplay, and it wouldn't have been a problem for Will's mom not to be there, since originally Will was supposed to take the fight upstate to a more rural area where no one would get hurt by the werewolf, but time constraints did not allow us to take the cast and crew upstate, film at the house I have up there. So it had to happen in Carle Place. So we lost quite a bit of stuff with not being able to take it upstate. We lost some atmosphere. We lost some nice looking scenery, and we also lost some setup for the sequel. But we're still gonna be able to have it in Mountain Walker. But we'll get to that a little later. Here we have the first scream, and we have the final action scene ensuing now. That scream was supposed to be Meg's, but it's actually Chrissy's scream from earlier in the film. We recorded some stock screams from Chris about, whenever we had to use a female scream in the film. Nicola refused to record her own scream off camera, just because she's not the kind of girl who screams. So I had to use Chrissy's scream whenever we're supposed to have Meg screaming as kind of a stock scream. The final action scene was shot all in one night, despite hopping from location to location. It was just easier that way. I had the entire cast together, so I decided to work with it by jumping from location to location. Again, we had to work with not being able to show the werewolf because Mike wasn't there, so we had audio to work with us here. We had to have audio of the werewolf breaking through the house and breaking through glass and chasing Will and Meg. And now we have Will and Meg running back to Will's house to confront the werewolf. And this is probably might even be my favorite scene in the film, where we have Will and Meg fortifying themselves against the werewolf. Again, it was supposed to be very different in the original outline. It was supposed to take place upstate. William Stone was originally supposed to have a machete as opposed to an axe. There was supposed to be a couple days in between Will fighting the werewolf one more time and then going upstate. There was supposed to be another action scene in there, but I cut it out. There was just a lot that got cut out in between the outline and the finished film. And this action scene was the most different. Hell, this action scene is even different from how it's written in the final script, and we'll get to that a little later. What you're seeing right now is all planned and shot from script. There's no difference. But this scene was fairly easy to shoot. Mark was behind the camera, so I didn't have to worry about operating the camera and acting at the same time. The only problem here was us being tired. This was about 10:30 at night when we were shooting this. Everyone was tired. Quite a few of us had worked the day before. So it was a little difficult to get the best performances out of them, but it is one of the most important... It's probably the most important scene in the movie, so I got the best out of them that I could. And I think that it worked out fairly well. This is indeed my favorite scene in the movie, and I got the best acting I could out of them. Nicola's acting is, a little bit... the only problem with it is that her sister just died, and she had a little bit of a hard time communicating that, but again, she was tired, and she's never had her sister die, so she didn't quite know how that felt. And I don't think I did a great job directing how she was going to do it, so just a series of things, how she was going to react to that, so it was a little bit difficult. What else can I talk about? It was just a really hard scene to shoot for that reason, just because we were all tired. And jumping back and forth between the angles of aiming down at Meg and aiming up at Will. This is one of my favorite. This is the line or series of lines I was referring to earlier, where I think it's very clear that Will's dad died in a car accident, because this is the scene where Will admits that he knows how it feels to lose a family member and not being able to do anything about it. And kind of Will's big speech on being able to fight the werewolf. He basically admits that, I dealt with my dad dying in a car accident, and This was a take I was very surprised we only had to do once, because it was a big dialogue scene, and I thought we were going to have to do it 2 or 3 times. We only had to do it once, which I was very happy about. And now we're building up to the final frames of the film because the werewolf is on its way. We heard howls in the distance before, and now we have Will. Now we have Will building up his plan, and now we have William Stone. Oh, he's not going to do it yet. Now we have one more howl. And now we have William Stone finding his main weapon in the film. The axe is calling to him. Again, it was supposed to be a machete. This was supposed to be the origin of how Will got a machete. But we couldn't get our hands on a machete in time to shoot the scene. We should have gone to... We were going to go to Home Depot and buy one, but we didn't have the chance to get over there before we started shooting. So an axe was more than suitable for William Stone fighting a werewolf. And... it wasn't a problem. The other big thing that got cut out of this scene was a gun. Megan was supposed to be equipped with a gun, but the prop gun we had wasn't ready to be used in time. We had to paint it black for it to be used, and it was just impossible to get our hands on in time for the scene to start. So we decided it wasn't necessary. We cut out all the lines referring to it and all the stage directions referring to how it was supposed to be done, and now we're building into our final frames of the film. One of my favorite things about this scene is just how William Stone explains that the werewolf is chasing them, because realistically, after the werewolf has killed Meg's sister, it has no reason to chase them. But the reason they came up with is it's not an animal. What they're fighting is not an animal. It's a monster. It's a mutation. And more than that, it's a mutation built out of Dave's darkest feelings, his darkest desires. And he hates William Stone at this point because he feels like Will is competing with him for dominance. And he hates Meg because Meg, he killed Meg's sister, and Meg was stopping him from getting to Meg's sister for sex. And there's his reasoning for hating them. And now we're building into the final action scene. This scene was very, very different from how we originally wanted to how we scripted it and how we originally wanted to shoot it. What just happened was everyone was dead tired. There was about 10 more pages to shoot of action, and I decided to cut it out just because it was unnecessary. There was a very clear place in the script for Will to be able to kill the werewolf, and I decided to exploit it. So, in the script, what you're watching happens. Will goes up to the back door, and the werewolf bursts through. And, this was all supposed to happen. Will was supposed to chop at it. The werewolf was supposed to jump towards Meg, and Will was supposed to chop at its legs and stop it from chasing Meg, and was supposed to get it to go after him. And then the fight was supposed to go outside, but I decided to just improv it and have us kind of, ad-lib a scene where Will kills the werewolf inside. It was just easier to shoot. I wanted it to look better than having a longer scene that looked crappy, so I decided to have a short scene that looked awesome. And I think that we succeeded in that. So I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I like the way it turned out better. It makes more sense. I think it just works better for the film. We have some nice CG blood there to show that Meg's dead. Some people thought that the ending of the film was supposed to be Meg turning into a werewolf, that she wasn't dead. That was not my intention at all. She has to die for the sake of the story, and so does Dave. So that's why we decided to kill Meg off, and why I decided to put the blood in there to signify her death. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's Werewolf of Carle Place. There you go. That's the movie, and that's my audio commentary. But I'm not quite out of things to say yet, so while the credits are rolling, I'll say a couple last-minute things. Again, the blood was just put there to make Meg's death more obvious, and originally, I wanted to put some fake blood on Mike to show that he was dead, and originally I wanted him to go shirtless for that scene, because you don't see the werewolf a lot in the last scene. So, and putting fake blood on him would just look more epic if he was shirtless. But he didn't want to do it, and I thought it would have been awkward to do on set, so it wasn't really necessary. And he didn't want fake blood all over himself anyway, so cut it out. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about Werewolf of Carle Place. My first movie. And watching it again and doing my director's commentary was a lot of fun. Of course, we have our last music cue in the film for you know all the wolf stuff, and I wanted to stay in that tradition of the werewolf, you know, or the wolf music seeping into the film. So all the music in the film was handpicked to kind of fit the werewolf tone, but also to fit the kind of light tone. This film is not just a straight up horror movie. It's kind of a mix between, you know, action, horror, science fiction, comedy. There's a lot of comedy moments in the film, and I thought that to encapsulate that, but also again to kind of play homage to An American Werewolf in London, I wanted to use a song that they didn't use, but stayed in their vein of they were using songs that had moon and wolf in them. So I figured if the song had been written at the time, they would have used it. So I decided to throw in Hungry Like the Wolf by Duran Duran. And I'm really glad that I got the chance to use it and that it didn't get flagged for it. I'm very, very happy at that. So thank you, YouTube, for not flagging this movie for using the Duran Duran song. Now, let's get into Tommy Doyle. Tommy Doyle was supposed to do an entirely original score for this film, so I couldn't use any copyrighted music. But he had stuff going on, and he was just unable to give me a full score, so we were not able to use all of his music, which would suck. But I've got a back catalog of a couple of his songs, so maybe in the future we'll do another cut of the movie that has them in it, but as of this cut, none of his music was used just because there wasn't a lot of it, and it wouldn't have worked in context because he didn't get to give me a full score. But that's about it, ladies and gentlemen, about all I have to say about Werewolf of Carle Place, at least in the audio commentary. Maybe we'll do some special features later on in the future, but as of right now, that was Werewolf of Carle Place in my first feature-length film. Anyway, so we have our final, production company credits there. And this is, of course, not going to be my last movie. I have a plethora of stuff I want to do, and not William Stone's last movie. I have a plethora of places I want to take him, and one of those places is the sequel to Werewolf of Carle Place, Mountain Walker. So I hope you'll join me for that. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it informative. I found it entertaining. I'm Zazubaar, and I'm Bill Worster, and thank you very much for taking this journey back into Werewolf of Carle Place with me. Farewell.